Alguma introdução?
We can begin now.
Posso começar então? Tá valendo. Ok. Bom dia a todos. Meu nome é
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ansgar Bikonski. I'm Innovation and Sustainability Manager of the Commerce Chamber, Brazil and Germany in Rio. And I'd like to welcome everyone for this seminar that is a brand new seminar. For the first time, we're going to talk in Brazil about green hydrogen certification. First of all, I'd like to thank the Ministry of Mines and Energy and MPE and Gen Z for the support for supporting this event. This event is being made with the Energy Partnership Brazil and Germany, and we've been discussing several themes surrounding the green hydrogen topic. So this certification topic was really unanimous, and there were some doubts on how the certification should be done and what should be the impact for Brazil and the economy here in Brazil. So that's why we decided to bring international experts for this event. I'd like to introduce the schedule. After my talk, we're going to have Samira's welcome. She's the coordinator of energy efficiency of the Ministry of Mines and Energy. And then we're going to have Katarina Seiler. She's from the Renewable Energy Agency from Germany. And about 9:45, we're going to listen to Nuria Harman about the perceptions of this debates in the European Union about green hydrogen. And from 10 to 10:45, then we're going to look more towards Brazil and see how this is working in Brazil, and we're going to hear Ricardo Guerra. First of all, Katarina and Nuria are going to speak in English. And if someone would like to listen to these talks in Portuguese, both in Zoom and on, I just forgot the name of the platform, the YouTube platform. So both on YouTube and on Zoom, you'll be able to listen to this simultaneous translation of this talks into Portuguese. The other subject is about green hydrogen as well. We always talk about green hydrogen, blue and gray hydrogen as well, but we have several differences. What is green exactly? Is it green when it's generated by renewable energies? But if we use in Brazil our grid with 85% of renewable energies, what's the influence of the water consumption in dry regions. So all these themes are debated, are discussed to reach a certification so that in the end the buyer knows that hydrogen, ammonia, or other products that they buy really is green or is as green as possible, let's say this way. So this is what we're going to hear now. So first of all, I'd like to pass the floor to Samira so that she can welcome us from on behalf of the Ministry of Mines and Energy. Samira, good morning, Ansgar. Good morning, everyone, wherever you are, all around the world. First of all, I'd like to greet you, Ansgar, and also greet the other institutions that are here with us in energy partnership, Brazil and Germany, the Energy Research Agency that coordinates the work in green hydrogen, and the Gen Z and AHK teams who are supporting this dialogue. Presently, we feel that hydrogen in the economy is already being defined as an important alternative. Nowadays, the debates are not centralized in technological feasibilities or economical feasibilities, but they are centered on how we're going to implement this. And we've been seeing this movement of all these countries intending to present their strategies on hydrogen economy, especially concerning economic carbonization. As many already know, Brazil has been developing technologies for hydrogen production and energy implementations for a while. It has been part of the international partnership, and in 2005 it had launched a first uh, text on in terms of the use of green hydrogen in the Brazilian economy. Because of different circumstances, this was not implemented, but there were several projects and investments. And we've got to today, with this moment after the pandemic, and when we have the energy transition, and Brazil is within this context a great potential player because of its huge ability of renewable energy. And also because of this, CNP, the National Council of Energy Policies, define hydrogen as a relevant research topic here in Brazil in the beginning of 2021, and has requested that the Ministry of Mines and Energy, together with the Ministry of Regional Development and the Ministry of Sciences and Technology, developed and presented the guidelines of a hydrogen program in Brazil. And it intends to create synergies for this, for the Brazilian market. So this is how we've been working within this energy partnership between Brazil and Germany. Germany is a very important country with a huge demand for green hydrogen in the next years, but it's a great partner of Brazil in terms of renewable energy. And within these two countries, we had the interest of supporting, there was the interest of supporting the advancement of the debates in both countries. First, we had this mapping of green hydrogen in Brazil. This paper is already available on the internet and on the ministry's website as well. And we've had a complete outlook of its use in Brazil. And then we had the idea of supporting the Brazilian government to receive the subsidies, especially together with the private sector. And then we had the task forces in hydrogen. These are things that are very relevant for this, which is production. And with the AHK partnership, we defined the interest topics for the private sectors for the debate and to deepen this discussion. And in all groups, the certification theme was something that was defined as important. So here we are together, and I think this is one of the first events to talk about hydrogen certification in Brazil. And then we're going to bring the international experiences and a few experiences that we have in Brazil. I'd like to thank and greet all the speakers, Katarina, Nuria, Ricardo, and I hope that we have a good event with good debates today, and hope this is very productive for all. Thank you once again for the opportunity, and good event to everyone.
Samira.
Thank you, Samira. And let's move to our first presenter, Katarina Seiler. She works as a senior expert in renewable energies in the German Energy Agency. Her work is concentrated on hydrogen certification, hydrogen production calculations, and pricing and quota on greenhouse gas by 2030. Currently, Katarina Seiler, she has worked for the Silence Institute as an associate researcher with the EU. And the goals of her project is to develop even more the advanced biofuel possibilities. She has a master's in environmental management with the Amsterdam University. Therefore, Katarina,
the stage is yours. You can start your presentation.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me today. So my name is Katarina Seiler, as already introduced. Thanks for the kind introduction. And I also want to take the time to introduce the German Energy Agency, which operates at the cross junction between policymakers and the economy in the fields of renewable energy, but also energy efficiency, renewable buildings, sustainable buildings, the transport sector, and so on and so forth. And today I want to present the paper which we published in the beginning of this year together with the World Energy Council on the global harmonization of hydrogen certification. The authors of the report are my colleagues Kim Lakai, Toni Reinholz, Kilian Krone, and myself, and the report was published on the 20th of January, and you can access it via this QR code here, and you also see the outline or the table of content on the right-hand side. So due to limited time, of course, we cannot go in detail for every aspect, but if you are interested in the depth of what I'm presenting today, I very much welcome you to have a look at the report. So, but first I want to ask the question, why is hydrogen certification needed? And the answer is that green hydrogen, we already heard it. There is no common standard of what exactly green hydrogen is. It depends on the regulatory framework of the respective country, and therefore certification only mirrors what is written in the legislative framework of the respective countries. And therefore certification is also an essential tool for demonstrating compliance with sustainability criteria set in those regulatory frameworks, also to potentially benefit from state aid provision, which could be, for example, subsidies, tax levy exemptions, or simply to get the hydrogen volumes counted towards national energy targets. So in the report, we assessed 4 different certification governance structures, but because they are more or less similar, I want to just give a quick example on the European Union case, where you can see on the right-hand side the graph. You have at the top the regulatory framework in the EU. This is set by the Renewable Energy Directive 2, which will be revised by this year. Some call it RED 2 revision, some call it RED 3. And then under the regulatory framework, which sets the sustainability criteria for green hydrogen, you have the so-called voluntary schemes, which are certification schemes that get officially recognized by the European Commission. And under the RED, and for biofuels, under the RED, we had 16 officially recognized voluntary schemes. And currently, the process is ongoing for voluntary schemes being recognized under RED 2. But not for hydrogen. So this is still for the biofuel sector, because for hydrogen there are still 2 delegated acts pending, and at least one of them will be published in 2 weeks, hopefully. So, and then under the voluntary schemes, we have the certification bodies. So in Germany, that would be, for example, TÜV Süd, and those are this is the certification body that actually conducts the audit on the ground at the plant. And then the market participant has the potential to either upload the certificate now within the national registry and receives a proof of sustainability for it, or at the long-term run, the goal is to have a union database in place. And this is also foreseen by RED 2, and this is a database on the EU level. And the major aim of it is to avoid double counting or multiple counting when certificates are traded across border. So what was the motivation to write this report? We saw that there are currently various hydrogen certification standards globally present, and so the idea was that if you certify your green hydrogen volumes according to the rules of market A, and then market prices change on a short run, and a market B becomes more attractive, then you would need to get certified again according to the sustainability criteria of market B. And this makes the current system a bit unflexible and also inefficient. And therefore, the motivation was to research the question if sustainability requirements could be aligned with one another in order to set up a globally harmonized certification system. So the research question we address in this report is that what would it actually take to harmonize requirements, and what is the common denominator enabling suppliers to address different markets? And the method we applied was that we identified and assessed 11 different hydrogen regulations and standards in terms of the potential for harmonization. And the 11 standards I just mentioned, they are looking as follows. We assessed the ISCC Plus standard, which is a voluntary standard and also a voluntary scheme in the EU. Then we assessed Certify, which started off as a guarantees of origin scheme in the EU, the DNA biogas register, which lists 200 biomethane plants and 3 hydrogen production plants. Then TÜV Süd's CMS 70 standard, which is also a voluntary market-based standard, but as soon as the criteria on EU level will be officially published, those EU criteria will be also implemented within this standard, and then it will be able to prove target compliance. Then we have the Chinese Hydrogen Alliances standard and the Japanese certification scheme at the prefecture Aichi. Then the Australian Zero Carbon Certification Scheme, H2 Global, the Californian LCFS, RED 2, and the British Renewable Transport Fuel Obligation. And the last 3 are regulations. So we looked at different criteria in regard to what's their purpose, or sustainability criteria like renewable electricity, tracking models, water consumption, social impact, etc., and looked where are already criteria for such in place, and where are certain criteria, in which standard are certain criteria not covered. So I start off with the purpose. The V stands for voluntary market-based. So that means that it cannot be used in order to demonstrate target compliance and count the volumes towards national energy targets. And the R stands for regulatory, so that it actually mirrors the regulatory framework and can be used to demonstrate target compliance. And for now, in terms of hydrogen certification, the ISCC Plus, Certify, and CMS 70, as well as the Japanese standard and the Australian standard are voluntary, but also, for example, regarding Certify, they already voiced their intention to getting officially recognized by the European Commission. So for them, for example, the V will in the future turn into an R. So it's a very dynamic system, and also in the EU, as I already said, the sustainability criteria are expected this month. So I think this table will change in the next couple of days quite a lot. And then for all assessed standards and regulations, the input of 100% renewable electricity is required. And then for the tracking model, we already have some differences. So we distinguish between a book and claim system, which means that the green hydrogen volume can be traded separately. So the volume can be traded separately from the certificate. And for mass balancing means the hydrogen volumes needs to be accompanied by the certificate along the supply chain. And mass balancing is actually a requirement within the EU to get the volumes counted towards national energy targets. But as we can see, for example, Certify has a book and claim system currently in place. TÜV Süd covers both. Japan has a book and claim system in place and the Californian LCFS, but also for certify, this book and claim system is expected to be turned into a mass balancing criteria. Then we also looked at the greenhouse gas emission calculation methodology, and in the report you will be able to see the set targets and also the reference baselines of the fossil counterpart. But for this table, I just want to focus on the actual scope of the different methodologies, which mainly differentiate between well to wheel, which means from the electricity source to the end consumption, or well to gate, which is the electricity source until basically until the hydrogen production. And then we also see that well to gate is covered by Certify, but also by the Japanese certification scheme and the Australian certification scheme. But it is, since this well to gate approach is also a requirement by the RED II for biofuels, it can be expected that the same will be the case for hydrogen, and therefore also here for Certify would need to change their scope of their greenhouse gas emission calculation methodology. Then now shifting a little bit away from hydrogen and what happens if you, for example, produce e-methanol from hydrogen or any other e-fuel, which means that now you need a carbon source. And in the EU, there was a very long discussion about which carbon sources should be actually eligible to produce e-fuel. So and the discussion circled around biogenic carbon, so carbon from industrial point sources, or atmospheric carbon. And everywhere where you can see a plus, there's already some criteria regarding those carbon sources in place. And it can also be said that everywhere where you can see a plus, all carbon sources that I just mentioned are eligible. And for the industrial point sources, the only limitation is that, of course, it should not be deliberately produced. Then for TÜV Süd and the Chinese Hydrogen Alliances standards, you can see out of scope because those two standards only focus on the value chain until hydrogen. So those are pure hydrogen standards and do not take e-fuel consumption into consideration. And on the EU level, there's still a delegated act pending where a leak of this act is already available since this February. And this will also be, once this is officially published by the European Commission, it will also be integrated into Certify, but also ISCC Plus, H2 Global, and so on and so forth. And according to the current leak, also all three carbon sources are eligible. And there's also already, there was also already an GHG greenhouse gas calculation methodology integrated. Then regarding land use change is a criteria which we already know from the biofuel sector, which means that, for example, forests cannot be cut down for the sake of biofuel production. And this, in some standards and regulations, this has been shifted also, or this has been applied also by the hydrogen standards, for example, in ISCC Plus, but also in H2 Global and the Californian LCFS. And for water consumption as a criteria is in most of the standards and regulations we assess not present, except for some like ISCC Plus, the Zero Carbon Certification Scheme, H2 Global and LCFS. And the reason why we added here a neutral sign was that there was no hard criterion, for example, on you are not able to exceed a water efficiency factor of X, Y, Z. So it was always more implicit, like excessive use of water should be avoided. This is, for example, written in RED 2 or in the Californian LCFS. Before you implement a hydrogen project, you would need to pre-assess all water bodies in terms of their quality and quantity before such a project can take place. Then the social impact criteria, the most common ones are the protection of labor law, human rights, and also the respecting national treaties or international treaties and national laws. And this is implemented in ISCC+, but also H2 Global voiced that they want to implement this, those criteria, and the Californian LCFS mentioned them as well. In RED 2, we cannot expect that this will be integrated because it has already not been done for biofuels. And I think one part of the reason is that such things need to be decided on a national level. So, and now in terms of harmonization, what we've seen now from those tables I represented, there are not many criteria where you can say there is a huge overlap between all the 11 regulations and standards. The most harmonized ones are the usage of 100% renewable energy and mass balancing as the tracking model, as well as all eligible carbon sources. But it's not enough in order to set up a globally harmonized system. So there is a huge heterogeneity, and also one of our findings was that we do not think that very ambitious standards or regulations will give up their most ambitious criteria for the sake of a harmonized system. So therefore, we want to approach this issue from another perspective and provide a plan concept which actually complies to all 11 standards and markets we assess. And this plan concept looks as follows. You would need to have a direct connection between the renewable power source and the electrolyzer. The reason is because with the grid connection, you have all those very complex criteria. In the EU, for example, the additionality, temporal correlation, geographical correlation, which other markets do not have. So there is one of the biggest heterogeneities within the grid, lies within the grid connection. That's why we say if you have a direct connection, you could actually address all markets assessed, and you would need to comply to a 70% greenhouse gas reduction compared to a fossil baseline, and the carbon sources, carbon source used should be atmospheric. We said that because at that time, and still the delegated act is not out, and this, according to our sources, this is a very safe bet that atmospheric carbon will be integrated into the legislative framework or eligible. So as already said, the direct connection is
conexão direta.
And all the other aspects which I just mentioned comply with all standards and regulations that we assess. But I also want to give two other plan concept as an option and mention to what markets they comply to. So for the grid connection, without any additional criteria, just proving that you use 100% renewable energy and you have a grid connection, you would be eligible for the Chinese, Japanese, Australian, and Californian market. If you have a grid connection and use 100% renewable energies, for example, with a PPA, and now also fulfill additional renewable electricity criteria, as we know them from the European Commission, like the additionality, geographical correlation, temporal correlation, temporal correlation, system serviceability, and so on and so forth. You would comply with ISCC Plus, certify the Dana Biogas Register, TÜV Süd, H2 Global Red 2, and the British Renewable Transport Fuel Obligation. So to conclude our findings is that the most harmonized sustainability criteria are the use of renewable electricity inputs, mass balancing as the tracking model. Again, mass balancing is linking or trading certificates with the hydrogen volume, as well as the usage of all eligible carbon sources as long as they are not deliberately produced for the power fuel production. So those are the most harmonized 3 criteria. But currently, a harmonized global certification scheme seems out of reach because for some regulations or standards, that would mean to give up on the most ambitious requirements, such as the renewable electricity criteria according to RED 2, Article 27. But we can propose a plan concept which complies with all 11 hydrogen regulations or standards, which is a direct connection to the renewable electricity plant, a 70% greenhouse gas reduction compared to the reference value, fossil reference value, and carbon from direct air capture. And of course, the chain of custody must be traced by mass balancing. Then, because I also added this on the slide, current initiatives, there are still current initiatives to set up such a globally harmonized hydrogen standard, and one of them will be presented at the Barcelona International Convention Center on the 17th to 18th of May by the Green Hydrogen Organization. And another initiative is by APEC, which also currently explores the idea to develop a low carbon hydrogen international standard. Then also to talk about Brazil. So what does this now mean for Brazil and exporting to the EU or producing green hydrogen for the national Brazilian market? So if you want to export from EU and you as a producer aim to benefit, for example, from the greenhouse gas quota, which means that you want to generate CO2 certificates from green hydrogen, then you would need to comply to the regulatory framework, which will be published this month. And if you want to count the green hydrogen volumes towards your national targets, then you would need certification as well according to your set regulatory framework. Other ADINA activities on certification is that we have we published a short analysis with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung on certification last year, and also we offer some guidelines for verification of cross-sectoral concepts, which is a report within the EU Regatrace project. And here we provide what kind of verifications do you actually need to prove certain criteria. Then the German Energy Agency also operates the Global Alliance Power Fuels Network, where as a producer or as a stakeholder you can become a member of. And I also would recommend you to check their website because they have always very interesting, informative reports, for example, about the different carbon sources and their sustainability performance or their economic value. And so I recommend you to also go on their website. And now we are already at the end of this presentation, and thank you very much for your attention. And in case you have any question, I'm happy to answer them now.
Okay, muito obrigado, Katarina. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katarina. I had a few questions here that I wrote down, but I think you've answered all of them, especially in these two last slides. These are very interesting for the companies and organizations who would like to produce hydrogen for export. And a question that I doubt that I still have that, depending on the destination for export, the producer needs to be certified. So a certification for Australia is not accepted in Europe. Is that correct? For instance?
Yes, exactly.
E sempre precisa uma recertificação.
So always there needs a new certification of everyone, actually. And I understand that Red 2 is the most strict one in terms of certification conditions. Is that correct? That means having the Red 2, it can serve as an example for the others.
Yes, exactly. But also, I think behind the like this Red 2, there is also very attractive policy instruments in place, like, for example, the greenhouse gas quota really strongly influences the business case. And we have a lot of companies approaching us who plan to, for example, implement their own or build their own hydrogen capacities. And their first question is, how much quota can I generate from this? And if it's, of course, if it's sufficient, then they want to get certified. So I think the EU market, the sustainability criteria are strict in comparison to other markets, but also the benefits behind this, the regulatory framework are quite attractive. So it has a strong pull effect.
Okay, so then thank you very much for your presentation. Very interesting, and I think also very comprehensive. Let's go now to the next and see how now all the qualifications, all these discussions about certifications, what is the impact, ou quais são as percepções dessa discussão sobre essa certificação aqui.
And what are the impacts of this certification here for Latin America? So now I'd like to invite Núria Hartmann. Núria studied macroeconomics with the specialization of energy economics and regional studies of Latin America at the University of Cologne in Germany. Since 2013, Núria is based in Santiago, in Chile, where she has worked as an environmental consultant for both the public and private sector. As a senior consultant of PricewaterhouseCoopers in Chile, she has realized several projects related to renewable energies and energy efficiency, especially for mining companies. From 2016 to 2016, as the Chilean office at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Chile, she has done multiple projects in collaboration with different institutions, including ministry, municipalities, universities, and regional governments. From 2018 to 21, she has worked as an independent consultant in topics related to energy and sustainability, and she has been part within the proposal for a national strategy for the development of renewable hydrogen market for the Energy Ministry of Chile and was co-authored in several publications. Since February 2021, she's part of the Nissio team in Chile, where she's a manager within the business strategy line, leading several renewable hydrogen projects, especially related to market studies and hydrogen roadmaps. So Núria, you have the floor, and we can listen to your comments. Thank you, Ansgar. Thank you for the invitation for this workshop and the Brazil-Germany Chamber. I forgot a lot of my Portuguese, so I'm going to speak in English as Katarina, but I know that you have the translation. Ansgar.
Yes, you can see it.
Okay, perfect. So just to give an overview about the contents I will present, I will start with a very short overview about the company Nissio, what we are doing, and then I will give the context about the EU markets and the regulatory framework in the EU to consider. Katarina already mentioned many aspects, and I will deep dive some of them. After that, I will jump on a little bit certification topics with the example Certify, but just outlining the key aspects, and then I will finish with some recommendations for the policymakers and especially project developers of hydrogen projects with regards to this exportation of products to the European market. So a few words about Nissio. We are a consultancy founded more than 15 years ago with a headquarter in Brussels in Belgium. We have also offices in Paris, in France, and in Latam, we have a huge office in Bogota, in Colombia, and also here in Santiago de Chile, where I am based, with also representation in Mexico City. And recently we opened an office in North America, in Washington, D.C. And in Europe, we have also an office in Rotterdam, which is one of the main ports, as you might know, for the future importation of this power-to-X products. Where we have done a lot of projects for countries in Latin America, but also, as you see here in this map, a lot of projects were delivered to countries in Europe. And also to mention that Nissio is co-developing or coordinating actor together with the European Commission of the certification scheme since 2014. There I have some colleagues more involved. They are in the Brussels office, and they have been working on the setup of the certification scheme. Our clients, we have clients along the whole value chain of hydrogen because we offer different consultancy services regarding to decarbonization strategies, to hydrogen roadmaps for companies, identifying business opportunities for project developers which are aiming to develop renewable hydrogen projects in Chile and other countries of the region. So we have a lot of insights from different market players regarding their uncertainties of this new developing market. So this was a little bit about Nissio. Now I will deep dive the context of the EU market. And here I want to do this initial disclaimer. And of course, we all know that we are talking about European legal frameworks in this Brazilian conference, because as we know, Europe has announced its huge need to import renewable hydrogen. There are a lot of estimations. They are around 77 million tons of hydrogen per year that the European Union is projecting to import from different countries of the world due to its ambitious climate targets. And Brazil, of course, is one of the countries very interesting to export in the future hydrogen and its derivatives. So it's very important to understand the relevant European markets, because there are different ones for the different molecules and their applications, and to understand their eligibility criteria for this hydrogen and its derivatives. It's the first step before we go to certification, to understand this regulatory framework. And also to say that, as I mentioned, Certify, I will just resume the key aspects, because Certify is nowadays not working beyond EU borders, but it can be a good example for any future certification scheme to be developed in Brazil, and to understand how these schemes can be developed. So we have different climate protection targets on EU level. The most important one, the overall target, is to reach climate neutrality by 2050. And there was recently published the Fit for 55 proposal, which sets the target to reach 55% less greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared to 1990. And there we have different sub-quotas, and the one which is interesting in this context is the targets of the share of renewable energy, which are regulated, as Katarina already mentioned, in the Renewable Energy Directive, the RED, which currently is under amendment and will go into public revision soon. This is the RED 2. And this RED 2 sets a target of 28% of renewable energies in transport sector by 2030. And this obligation is for fuel suppliers. And this is regulated in this Articles 25 to 30. There are a lot of requirements I will explain in the next slides. So we have a strong targets here for the transport sector and also for the industrial sector, as we will see afterwards. And these are the drivers for the creation of a lot of new markets. So this overview table is less complicated as it seems. What I wanted to show here is that you have in the first line in blue the different markets for hydrogen molecules and ammonia, etc. Its derivatives. So it depends on the application. For example, there's the market for maritime fuels, which is or will be regulated by the EU Fuel Maritime Directive, which was announced on European level. There is the possibility to produce e-kerosene for aviation fuel. This market will have another regulation, which is the Directive for Fuel Aviation, which is also announced. And we have a very important market where we, as I mentioned, have the chance to introduce renewable hydrogen for transport uses as a fuel, as a renewable fuel, and also which is regulated by RED 3 as a feedstock for industry. And these are the so-called RFNBOs, which are the renewable fuels non-biological origin. So we are talking here about renewable hydrogen produced on behalf of renewable electricity via electrolysis. And then we have the opportunity to produce the molecules of renewable hydrogen, renewable ammonia, and methane. For hydrogen molecule being developed, driven by different regulations. And the majority of these are currently under development. It's a dynamic process, as Katarina already mentioned. And here we will focus on these two markets where hydrogen has a huge potential. So what are the specific criteria of this Renewable Energy Directive 2, which is the amendment? So we have 40% of renewable energy penetration target in the transport sector by 2030. This is the more ambitious target than the initial one. So each member state of the European Union has set of fuel suppliers to ensure that the share of renewable energy in the transport sector, this includes all the segments, trains, airplanes, passenger vehicles, heavy-duty trucks, etc., reaches at least 14%. And the options to reach this are to apply RFNBOs in this case, which refer to renewable hydrogen. And this includes also the adoption of renewable hydrogen for refineries, for oil refineries, to decarbonize. And this also includes recycled carbon-based fuels. These are flue gases of refineries or other chemical complex processes released into the atmosphere and which are being kept correlation and other specific requirements, which are all already announced and defined, but still under revision and not officially confirmed. So here I will jump into the explanation of this different conditions for a RFNBO fuel to be considered eligible in the European Union according to this this RED 2. So here we have the case 1, there are different options for a project developer to comply with the additionality of the renewable energy source, which is used for the electrolyzers. So in the default case, the project developer has a grid connection to the grid mix of the relevant country, in this case Brazil. So the RFNBO renewability share is based on the share of renewable electricity in the country of the grid. But of course, here the problem is that as it's not 100% renewable, just a certain percentage of the grid, there will be a huge percentage of gray hydrogen produced also by the electrolyzer, and this has to be sold. But the production is much more expensive. There's the capex of the electrolyzer that the company, the project developer, has to invest in, and he has just a little percentage of a really renewable fuel because the grid, as I mentioned, is not fully renewable. So there are the other two alternatives, which are case 2 and case 3, to produce 100% renewable fuel, like hydrogen in this case. So there's the one option to directly connect the electrolyzer to an additional renewable energy plant, which the project developer would build himself, a new plant of renewable energy, wind or solar. So there would be the direct connection between the electrolyzer and the plant. And here the requirement is that this renewable energy plant of the most important aspects here. And here you need to make sure as a project developer that the renewable energy source was not already selling to the electricity grid before. It has to be a new one, additional renewable energy plant. So there's the temporal correlation between the renewable energy plant and the electrolyzer. And the most the major challenge here is to streamline this timing of the project development. And then we have a very important third case, which is that a project developer which aims to produce renewable hydrogen connects to the grid, but with a green PPA. So he's buying from another provider of green electricity via one or several power purchase agreements, PPAs. And there we have 3 aspects that the RED 2 is defining that the project developer would have to comply with, which is the additionality, the temporal, and the geographical correlation. And these are outlined here in the slide. So you see it's very detailed requirements. I will share this presentation, of course, with the organizers, so you can have a detailed look afterwards. But just to explain the key message here, so there's the, in case of the grid connection of the electrolyzer, on behalf of PPAs, which provide the renewable electricity, there are the requirements in terms of additionality, which said that the renewable energy source installation was commissioned or repowered a maximum 24 months before the electrolyzer and does not receive financial support, or the electricity consumed during specific hours where the transmission system operator can prove that there's curtailment. That means that there's much more electricity available than being possible to fed in the RED. And then if this is the case in the same bidding zone, so this can also be declared as additionality criteria, or the electricity consumed provided by the PPA is during specific hours where the price of electricity is €0 per megawatt hour in the same bidding zone than the electrolyzer. So you see here a lot of definitions of specific aspects according to European definitions, of course. So this is one aspect important that project developers and also decision makers in Brazil would have to understand what is the implication of this for Brazil and how is it possible to comply with this in a Brazilian context.
So maybe where there are other definitions of the bidding zones, for example, so it's important to have a detailed look on this. The temporal correlation, just to give a short overview, is that the electricity from the PPA provided needs to be consumed by the electrolyzer within the same hour it was produced, or the electricity from the grid is consumed within an hour where the electricity from the PPA is available and the share of renewable energy source in the same bidding zone is higher than the average share of renewable energies from the previous 3 calendar years. So it's a little bit tricky. I think you may have a look on this afterwards when we have the presentation. So there are a lot of requirements. And the third block is the geographical correlation. So there is the need that the renewable energy plant or installation is located in the same bidding zone as the electrolyzer, according to the European definition. Also here, this requires to have a look how the bidding zones are defined, and the definition of them is in Brazil, to check if it's possible to comply with this, or if there would need any amendment or a change of this definition. Or the renewable energy source installation and the electrolyzer are in different bidding zones, but with a day-ahead price of electricity which is equal, also according to European definition. As Katarina already mentioned, everything of these aspects I mentioned are currently still under revision by the Delegated Act. There have been a lot of leaked versions, about 5 so far, and it's because it's very heavy debated aspects. And the last key day was that this 18th of May, the Delegated Act will be published for public consultation, which will lead 6 weeks. So it's a process which will be undergoing the next months. There's also some additional proposed targets in this renewable energy directive, which is called RED III. These are more ambitious targets, even for, and they are also referring to the application of renewable hydrogen for industrial uses, other ones than oil refinery, because the application of hydrogen in oil refineries was already covered by the RED II in terms of transport. So here the idea is to increase the share of renewable hydrogen for industrial users like glass manufacture, like other industrial processes of mainly ammonia production, methanol, and biofuels. Yes, this is the most important aspects. As I already showed a little bit, there are a lot of regulatory uncertainties so far. It's an ongoing regulatory process. But again, here it's important to mention that it's very important for project developers from abroad, in this case Brazil, to understand these requirements, because this framework sets the whole frame and the whole guidelines. And after that would come the certification scheme, because the molecules exported from Brazil, being hydrogen, ammonia, methanol, really they would need to be eligible under this Delegated Act criteria. And there are also many questions open. For example, what are the boundary limits? So are we just talking about the greenhouse gas and the emission reduction of the power, hydrogen, or is it power to hydrogen to ammonia and back to hydrogen? Because there's often the discussion to export hydrogen as a molecule via ammonia and maybe then change it again into hydrogen. So there are a lot of aspects still undergoing. I didn't want to transmit that this is just everything whole problem. There are a lot of aspects that project developers in Brazil already can refer to. For example, here are the criteria of H2 Global. Katarina also mentioned. H2 Global is a funding scheme currently developed by the incentive of Germany, but this will be aligned with RED II criteria, and there are a lot of sustainability aspects, not only about the additionality and the renewability of the electricity, but also about carbon sources, about water use, about the site selection for the projects of renewable hydrogen production, about waste and pollutant management of wastewater and waste in general. There are requirements for the compliance of labor and social standards. And these were already published by the German Ministry of Economy some months ago, and also H2 Global is still under development of the final criteria. They are not published officially so far, but this is a good orientation what the ministry has been publishing so far in context of its funding guideline for international cooperation projects. So you have, it's on internet, you can also have a look there and to have a notion, an idea about what sustainability criteria should be considered by project developers as a helpful orientation for them. Well, now I will jump to the topics of the certification. Why do we need energy attributes tracking systems, EATS? Well, in this case, we need data sheets for hydrogen, first of all, to be able to report towards the policy objectives, which I mentioned, so to be able to comply with them when adopting hydrogen for transport and fuel and also in industrial uses, and also to enable customer choice. The customer will just be willing to pay a premium price for this product if he really knows that this hydrogen is really renewable and where it comes from and what are its attributes. So the attributes in this case of hydrogen can be the origin, so where has this hydrogen been produced, in which location specifically, with which electrolyzer technology, what is the carbon footprint of this hydrogen or its derivative, what are the device production data, the technology, the plant location, as I already mentioned, and also the energy renewability, which is the temporal correlation, geographical correlation, and the additionality I already explained. And the other important criteria when we are talking about certification schemes is the emission accounting limits. Also, Katarina touched this point. So, to which point is the carbon footprint of this product being measured? Is it cradle to gate until the product is ready, or is it excluding the application and the end users, or is it until cradle to grave, where these applications are also included in it? So, for example, certify is just cradle to gate, and it's not considering the raw materials, for example, for the production of the plants, which are necessary to produce the hydrogen, and it's neither focusing on the end use and the application of it. It's just the production process. So certify, in a nutshell, as an overview, it's the first EU-wide guarantee of origin scheme for green and low carbon hydrogen. It was started as a request of the European Commission and financed by the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. And it's between all certification schemes under development, is one of the most advanced stage of development. It started in 2014 and had 3 phases. The first one was from 2014 to 2017. And the result of this phase was, for one hand, to design a formula for all the producers of hydrogen, which they need to fill in to register this certification scheme, giving information about the plant location, the technology of production, etc. And then there were defined 2 types of hydrogen, 2 labels. There's the certified green hydrogen, if the hydrogen is made from renewable energy, and the certified low carbon hydrogen otherwise. And both need to comply with a greenhouse intensity below 60% below the intensity of hydrogen produced in business as usual, which is gray hydrogen based on natural gas with SMR production process. What about the renewability, the percentage of how renewable the different hydrogen products are? It depends on the input. So, for example, here we see that the input for the hydrogen production is 30 gigajoule, 1 part biomass, the other one electricity. But from the electricity, just 23 gigajoule are renewable. So in total, this is 77% of the energy input is renewable. So this means that the produced hydrogen here is 77% renewable, not considering the non-renewable 7 gigajoule, which was part of the input. Also, as Katarina already mentioned, and just to explain it a little further, Certify is a book and claim scheme. A book and claim scheme enables the consumer to consume renewable hydrogen although there is no production in the vicinity of that consumer. So for example, we have a consumer here in Germany and he wants to consume green hydrogen, but there's no renewable hydrogen plant close to him. But with this energy attributes tracking system with Certify, he is able to buy the attribute of green hydrogen produced in this case in Spain. And but he will consume gray hydrogen from France. But as he paid for this attribute of renewability of the hydrogen, he can declare the hydrogen he is offering or consuming as renewable. Meanwhile, the producer in Spain, which sold the attribute to the consumer in Germany, is not able anymore to sell that hydrogen as green because he already set the attribute. So he could sell his hydrogen, but only as gray hydrogen to a third consumer in the neighbor country. So this is how the book and claim scheme works. Maybe a more easy to understand example here is in case of the offering of renewable hydrogen-based fuels in a hydrogen refueling station. So in case one, we have a hydrogen refueling station operator and he has no renewable hydrogen plant close to his hydrogen refueling station, but he is able to sell renewable fuels on behalf of these attributes because he can go to the guarantee of origin market, which is an electronic market in this case, Certify market, and he can buy this guarantees of origin, the certificates, and then supply a certain amount in his offer of green hydrogen to the end users. So this guarantee of origin scheme allows the access to green hydrogen for users that are not in the vicinity of green hydrogen sources and optimizes the economics and also the environmental footprint of the green hydrogen supply chain. So as a resume, I have just 5 minutes left, I think. Certify has been established as electronic certificates called guarantees of origin. It enables the EU-wide consumptions. This is why this is very important to mention. This is not currently working beyond EU borders. So this is just an example which could serve as an example for you in Brazil when you come to the point that you design your own certification scheme. It is an electronic document providing proof that a given quantity of hydrogen is produced by a registered production device. As I mentioned, the participants of this scheme need to inform where the production device is, what the production technology is. And it's a central database which manages guarantees of origins, avoiding any double use within the registry. So this is why this central database is so important. Nowadays, Certify is in the phase 3. They announced to want to build a certification system which complies with RED II, the renewable transport fuel requirements, everything I mentioned, and also work on the certification of downstream markets. As I mentioned, nowadays it's cradle to gate, but the idea is to include the applications also. And Certify's objective is, yes, to go beyond European borders, but there's no data, no date so far announced for that. So far, it's just in the European Union. My last 2 slides are about the perspectives and key messages for hydrogen project developers. So we have heard a lot now about certification and its relevance. So first one reason is, of course, to disclose in a reliable manner the product characteristics of the hydrogen, the renewable hydrogen, to the end consumer, which will be the one paying a premium price for the product to decarbonize its production process. And it's a pricing based on segmentation of the hydrogen market and based on the environmental attributes that the specific certification scheme considers. And also it's a very important tool for verification and reporting to demonstrate compliance with all the legislation we heard today, RED II specifically, and other corporate and national emission reduction targets. And of course, also it gives the possibility for project developers to access to tax incentives. For example, I heard there are first incentives in Brazil in the state of Ceará, where the exploitation of green hydrogen and derivatives from PSM port will also give certain incentives, tributarios, to when you export that molecules to other markets. Also, we have here schemes like H2 Global, which aim at closing the price gap between production price and the price on the market to make more economically feasible the development of these projects. The certification of hydrogen gives producers market access to these premium markets, and the markets I already mentioned, which are in development in Europe, the aviation, the fuel, etc. And of course, it's a reputational aspect because you contribute to the corporate social responsibility criteria. And as I mentioned already, Brazil's success in accessing these international markets will really depend on being able to meet the sustainability standards and requirements demanded by the potential consumers. The best case is that a project developer already knows who will be the off-taker, so he can look on that specific market, what this market requires, the specific regulation for that market. But knowing that most of the situations is that you don't know maybe the off-takers in the initial project development stage, the recommendation we feel is that the most important thing is to comply with the major quantity of sustainability criteria as possible. So to be flexible in further project development stages to offer products to different markets. So the recommendation number one is to understand what these off-taker markets are and what are the product eligibility criteria. The regulatory framework determines the project setup. Because if there are any requirements for the water consumption, for example, these are aspects that need to be considered in initial project development stages. In case of water desalination, for example, there are sustainability criteria that put the target that you need to monitor and verify a certain treatment of the waste of the seawater desalination, and even though maybe to use it as a raw material for innovative other processes. The second recommendation is that all the specifications of the hydrogen production, the input sourcing, and the output distribution meets the eligibility criteria before going into the detailed project engineering. A recommendation for policymakers is that it's always very important to keep on doing fostering bilateral coordination to set up the framework also in Brazil for this kind of projects, follow up this ongoing EU policy framework. And there's not always the specific off-taker market defined, as I mentioned, but it is important to have this sustainability criteria in mind. So this was the most important. There are a lot of other aspects, but in terms of time, I don't have so much time to go in detail, but as I mentioned, I will share my presentation afterwards. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Muito obrigado, Núria. Devido ao tempo, acho que e também não vi.
Due to time, I haven't seen any questions in the chat box. So thank you so much. I think your talk was very enlightening and very practical at the same time, and it will help us a lot and help everyone who's planning to work. Just a question, in terms of biomass, you've talked about RF and BO, but that's not referred to biomass only. How it is seen the hydrogen generation from biomass within this concept, within this regulatory context?
already mentioned, because the red tool is focusing really on RFNBOs, so fuels non-biological origin. I'm not an expert in the biofuels in this case. I don't know if Katarina can maybe mention something about that, but this is something I know it's regulated in a different way, also in this renewable energy directives, and there are other legal frameworks, but it's not part of this hydrogen relevant regulation in this context, which is the red tool.
Muito obrigado. Então vamos depois fazer uma segunda sessão sobre isso.
Thank you so much. And we're going to talk about this later on, because this is very important for Brazil as well. So now we've had a more detailed context. Now we'll have a general outlook about hydrogen certification in Brazil. So I'd like to invite Ricardo Guedra. He's an information and analysis manager of the commercialization chamber of electrical power. He has a master's in electrical University of São Paulo University, a specialization in management by the FGV, an MBA in TI. He has a 28-year professional experience in the electrical sector, including the marketing, distribution, and energy generation. He has published 6 books about this theme, and he teaches about energy in post-graduation courses. I believe that your presentation will be in Portuguese, so I'd like to pass the floor to you. Hello, Ansgar. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you for the invitation for being part of this debate, which is relevant to contribute to the development of hydrogen and to contribute for the Brazilian positioning in this sector. Can you see my screen? Is everything okay? Yes, I can see your presentation. Very well. We will begin talking about hydrogen certification. And it's very good to be able to talk after Samira, who has done an introduction about the national program that is structured in 6 vectors. Here we have the 4th axis that talks about the legal regulatory framework. And internally, it talks about the certification. And within the electrical sector governance in Brazil, the CCEs inserted. Here we have the Ministry of Mines and Energy, the National Electric Power Agency, and we have the ONS, National Operator of Electric System, and CCE, which is the Commercialization Chamber of Electrical Energy. And it has all the information of generation, consumption of electric power with all these assets and measurements and all the agreements of the Brazilian sector. That's why within the governance, the CCE is the player, because it uses all the mechanisms that is already structured in Brazil to complement and develop the certification. So what are the main aspects concerning this issue of certification? It's very important to have to meet international standards, and it was very well placed here and explained by Katarina and Julia. Also, a very important aspect is the cost optimizations, so that we can have cheap hydrogen fuel, and we need to have measurements, agreements, modeling, and we already use the cost of this process. And of course, it's important to have integrity and really reliability of the certification so that it is acknowledged internationally, and so that Brazil can provide a hydrogen that has a traceability and a real reliability, because this is very important for all the markets. And for that, we are doing an international monitoring of all the international certifications. This is just a few examples. Katarina has presented a complete study. Here we have the IPHE that is doing a complex calculation study for hydrogen production for different technologies, not only for bioelectrolysis, but we have a very calculation study that is quite relevant, HD Global, which is a very important player for the market, also certify that is the standard that is it's quite complete and employs the several criteria used in Europe. IRENA has several fronts in terms of renewable energy, also has a front in terms of certification, and he has recently published a study on this. And as Katarina has said about the Green Hydrogen Organization is going to publish in the next 2 weeks a certification standard. So it's very important to meet some of these standards.
E a CCS está de possibilidades
And
para
TCE is watching this possibility so that whatever is developed in Brazil could be acknowledged internationally. So we're working on certain criteria, and these criteria are a work in progress. They're not all defined, but actually all the certifications in the world are in development. They are all a work in progress. But these items are being debated. So we have 4 of them: the source identification, the additionality, geographic correlation, and temporal correlation, which is what we just seen, the main criteria that need to be watched. And what is applied to Brazil, because we have characteristics in our electrical regulatory framework, and that is already uh, in place, and how to translate this into the Brazilian characteristics. So let's talk about a few of them. So let's begin to talk about source identification. In Brazil, all the electrical generation is hired to the consumers. And here in Brazil, we have consumers that are in the free market, in the wholesale market, and some consumers are in the regular market. And in the free market, where we're talking that the companies that are going to consume this energy, and the first ones who are going to produce hydrogen, they're going to be big companies. They have some agreements in terms of generators. It can be a high production model. For instance, this could be the same company, or could be part of consortium. There are a few models, legal and statutory models, that it is possible, or it could be a free agreement of different companies. And I'm saying this because this is the characteristics of Brazil. We have talked about the public and private association, and in our regulatory framework, all the consumer need to have 100% of its electrical consumption with a higher generation. This is already defined, And if that's not done, there are several penalties on that. So it's quite reasonable to use this mechanism to identify what is the source that is supplying electrical power. And something that is linked to this, and it was very well explained by my colleagues here, we have a producer that is connected to the grid. So we're talking about the generator that is connected to the grid. We're not talking about an off-grid system, an isolated. This is a connected system that is the most reasonable in terms of cost. And the reasonable cannot be less strict, but as we have this regulatory system, we have to use that. In terms of additionality, Nuria has talked about other funding sources, plans. We can see if this plant was part of a bid. If it is part of a bid, maybe it has another source that is not a hydrogen source. And I'm talking about the regulated market, not specific consumer. And also not only the auction, but we have several regular agreements. And if there's an agreement, probably there's another source that help that. So it's important to see the existence of agreements in the regulated environment. But in the beginning, the big consumers and the big hydrogen producers, they will consume a lot of electrical power in the free market. So we're talking about big production and so on. Another important issue for the energy production, we will have to build a huge complex. For instance, a wind power plant. We can have a plant of 300 megawatts, a huge plant with certain locality. But in terms of modeling, it's not only one plant that is modeled. There are several plants because of different issues of the business. But that plant of 120 megawatts could be modeled in CCE in four different compounds. And we're going to see if one of that plant is going to be observed. So each one of this plant has its own agreement, and that's what we're going to observe. And of course, it's operation dates, when it started to work. So these are criteria to check in terms of additionality. We're talking about possibilities. I'm not saying that this is or that is the criteria. I'm going to talk about the details of certain criteria. This is just a general outlook of the criteria.
When we talk about geographical location, Brazil is fully interconnected. When I say that the system is fully interconnected, I'm saying most of the country, talking about 98% of the entire load, especially in the north region. There are some parts that are not connected, but mostly it is. And within the regulatory framework in Brazil, it is allowed to hire energy among generators and consumers that are connected within the system. So it is possible that we have a generator here in the Northeast. There are some here for renewable sources, and have this contract here in the South. So it is possible to have this plant that is physically installed in the South and supply a clean source through the grid in the Northeast. So the entire system in Brazil is interconnected. and the system carrier or operator will enable it and make it possible. So if the company is connected to the national interconnection system, they can connect from different locations. When we talk about temporal correlation, we always have the possibility of running the two models, because we can have different types of consumer. This is just an example. It's not a product yet. And the model, when we can see that it has been monthly accrued per consumer, which is a hydrogen manufacturer, because we are talking about the generation they made feasible, or we can analyze per hour. So we can have the data sorted by hour, even at every 5 minutes, but we are talking about hourly. So it is possible to analyze where I have a positive availability with a more clean generation being installed, or when we have a deficit. And since it's still being defined by the international scope, it's always interesting to have both models. Quickly, until we conclude, at the end of the year, we're gonna have something that is being structured but will be made available. It's a simplified version with basic requirements for the certification. And for next year, we're gonna have a full version of the certification to be implemented by the end of the year. So at first, by the end of this year, in the beginning of next year, we're gonna have all developed versions. We still do not have a forecast of having a plant fully productive of hydrogen, so we can have the full version being available by 2023. And by 2024, we should have some enhancements, because we cannot just believe that we're gonna have it 100% full by the end of 2023. And here, I would like just to add that the full version is still in development by the work group formed by governance in the electric and energy sector and representatives from the productive chain, who will have monthly workshops starting this week, actually. So the monthly workshops will be carried out between May and December, so that they can create the specifications for the certification and have it implemented next year. And whoever is interested in receiving further information on the work group can send an email to the CCE group, and you will have regular newsletters with updates on the hydrogen certification. Therefore, everybody who is interested in the theme can follow up on the development of the governance of the energy sector. So this was my presentation. Here's my contact information. If you want to be included in the newsletter, please send email to Atendimento. And I will be here and will be available for further clarifications. Thank you, Ricardo. You were very, very, very on time for us. I still have some questions here, but I'd like to direct my questions to everyone, because I believe the questions may be answered by all. Carlos Souza asked, hydrogen from biomethane can be intrinsically considered green? And the second question by him is, and biomethane launched in gas pipelines from one point can be used in another location that is distant and still be considered green? I don't know who would like to answer to this.
não sei, talvez a Núria, você tem alguma...
Núria, any comment?
Katarina, yes.
Okay. So for biomethane compared to hydrogen, the rules are exactly the same. So when you do not trace the certificate with the biomethane volumes, you cannot count the renewable biomethane towards renewable energy targets. And this is just the same rule as for hydrogen. And the book's book and claim approach is solely for consumer disclosure. And that's the case for biomethane and hydrogen as well.
E uma outra pergunta do Rômulo é...
And another question by Romulo. If the ship used to transport hydrogen uses diesel or any heavy oil, will it still be emission-free hydrogen?
Yeah, that's a very important aspect because I can explain from my vision about H2 Global, which is the scheme, the funding scheme of Germany for this kind of projects, for example, and they defined in their initial criteria, which are neither published officially, that the carbon footprint of the transport of the hydrogen or the other molecules is also included in the overall carbon footprint. So of course, it is important to consider to send that renewable hydrogen or ammonia or methanol with somehow a transport mechanism like a vessel with also fueled by renewable ammonia, for example, because it would be taken into account when the 70% of less greenhouse gas of that product are measured. And this is a very important aspect because it's crucial for project developers aiming at exporting. And this is a thing I understand also in the RED 2 or 3 is being touched. I don't know, Katarina, if you know it better, but it's also an aspect which will be defined there for molecules coming from abroad.
Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Aspecto muito importante,
So this is a key aspect, especially when we talk about Brazil that focuses on hydrogen exports. So we need to find ways to take hydrogen with a transportation method that has no carbon footprint yet to be developed. Thank you all, Ricardo and Núria. Thank you for your excellent presentations. For those who are listening to us, the presentations will be made available through our website, h2green.com.br, and we will have them available in a few days once we have compiled all of them and uploaded all of them. So once they have been uploaded, you can download all the presentations you need. Besides that, I would also like to thank the organizers of this event. I had previously forgotten to mention Amidas with organization and contact. And here at Zoom, after a very short break, we will remain here with a debate on the theme. And for those on YouTube, I would like to first, before disconnecting, I would like to once again show you a video that demonstrates the connection of ARK from Rio de Janeiro, that is part of the alliance between Brazil-Germany alliance. And we created this video that demonstrates this connection with green hydrogen. So I'd like to play the video here. Can I have sharing privileges, please? Maybe Fernando can play it. Yeah. I need a minute, please. I believe that one day water will be used as fuel, that hydrogen and oxygen are that within water will be used in an isolated simultaneous form and will offer an infinite source. This is Camilo. I'm sorry, we have no audio in the video. I believe we need to share the video again because there is no audio.
Bom, acho que eu mostrei a metade sem áudio.
I believe I showed the video without audio. I would like to apologize, but I think you can have an idea of our connection with green hydrogen. So I would like to conclude our broadcasting. And we'll have a 5-minute break for those here on Zoom, because we are going to start a debate on the theme in our breakout rooms. Thank you once again to the speakers. And for the others, we'll meet again in a